They say a man's land is his castle, but in Pine Hill, that castle came under siege, not by invaders, but by neighbors in khakis with clipboards. What started as a quiet morning on my porch turned into a war I never asked for. One woman, one HOA, and 100 strangers tried to turn my sanctuary into their playground. They thought they could outvote me, intimidate me, scare me into surrender. But they forgot one thing. When you trespass on someone's home, you're not just crossing property lines. You're crossing battle lines. And out here, on this dirt road, the rules don't come from some handbook. They come from grit, truth, and a pack of loyal dogs that don't take kindly to uninvited guests. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when I noticed the dust trail. Out in Pine Hill County, mornings were sacred. The stillness, the golden Wyoming sun, the quiet hum of birdsong, those were the rhythms I'd grown used to since retiring. My granddad's land stretched for miles, inherited after his passing, and I'd spent the last year restoring the barns and fences with nothing but my hands and a little help from my dogs. So when a convoy of SUVs, campers, and minivans came barreling down my private dirt road, I figured someone had made a wrong turn. Maybe a GPS glitch. But as they kept coming, car after car, I realized this wasn't a mistake. People started piling out coolers in tow, kids running wild, lawn chairs unfolding. A woman in yoga pants was already tying a hammock between two of my pines. Someone rolled out a portable grill. Another guy stepped out of a camper wearing a Camp Pine Hill 2023 t-shirt. I stood there on my porch barefoot, coffee in hand, absolutely stunned. Then I saw her. Clipboard clutched tight, blonde bob bouncing with purpose. Beatrix Langford strode into the center of the chaos like a general inspecting her troops. She wore her HOA badge like it gave her federal authority and smiled like she'd just solved world hunger. "Morning, neighbor," she called out as if we'd been lifelong friends. "We're so grateful for your generosity." My jaw clenched. Generosity? Oh, come now. Your land is perfect for the HOA's annual retreat. Quiet, private, rustic charm. A real getaway spot. You're a treasure, Eli. I stepped off the porch slowly. Beatrix, what the hell is going on? She blinked like I'd just asked why the sky was blue. It's our community camping weekend, remember? Voted on last month. We sent out notices. I'm not part of your HOA, I said. Never signed anything, never agreed to be included. And I sure as hell didn't approve 100 people turning my land into a campground. Her smile wavered, but only for a moment. Well, you live in Pine Hill Acres. That means you're technically adjacent to the jurisdiction. The board agreed that shared community space is fluid. I stared at her. You brought people here to camp on my private property. You didn't even ask. She gave that infuriating head tilt, the one she used when she thought someone was too dumb to understand. Eli, it's just one weekend. People have already taken time off. And look at how happy everyone is. It's good for morale. A shriek pierced the air. A teenager had stepped into a patch of cow manure and was hopping around screaming. "Gross, there's poop!" Beatrix turned, bright red. You told them this was a campsite? I asked, crossing my arms. I may have omitted a few details. You mean like the fact that this is working farmland? A woman in capris shouted, "Wait, there aren't any bathrooms?" A man sniffed. "What's that smell?" "Nature," I said. "You're standing in it." Beatrix's plastic smile snapped. "Okay, fine, it's not ideal. But it's too late now, Eli. Everyone's here. They've set up. You'd look like a real grump sending families home over a technicality." "A technicality?" I repeated, jaw tight. "That technicality is called private property law." She stepped forward. "Listen, if this is about being included, I'm sure the board can review your application for HOA membership. Then we can do this the right way next year." I took a deep breath, then smiled. "You want to vote on whether my land becomes public property?" "Well, that's how democracies work," she said smugly. I pulled out my phone. Then, let me introduce you to my kind of democracy. She narrowed her eyes. What does that mean? From behind the barn came the sound of paws on gravel. 6 massive dogs, Belgian Malinois, trained, loyal, and completely unimpressed by suburban politics, rounded the corner. Titan, the leader, let out a single, thunderous bark. The campers froze. A bag of marshmallows hit the ground. A kid started crying. Beatrix paled. You can't just unleash dangerous animals. They're on my land, I said. Same as you. Sweetke, someone whispered. Are they trained? They are, I said. To protect what's mine. Titan took a step forward, slow and steady. Shadow flanked him, ears pinned, eyes locked on Beatrix like she was the biggest squirrel he'd ever seen. I'm calling the police, she cried. I raised my phone. Already did. And as if on cue, 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up behind the last minivan. Beatrix stared at the cars. Her expression morphed from shock to horror to barely contained rage. Looks like the vote's over, I said, and the land stays mine. The crowd dispersed quicker than they had arrived. Under the watchful eyes of the sheriff's deputies, and with 6 intimidating canines overseeing every move, families packed up in awkward silence. The once lively campsite now resembled the aftermath of a busted music festival, littered with half-crushed soda cans, abandoned camping chairs, and more than a few broken egos. Karen, excuse me. Beatrix stood off to the side, her arms crossed so tightly across her chest, it looked like she was holding herself together by sheer will. Every now and then, she shot daggers at me with her eyes, but I didn't flinch. I was too busy petting Titan, who had earned an extra-large steak for crowd control. Looks like the law agrees with me, I said casually, as the deputies prepared to leave. Beatrix didn't reply. Her lips were pursed so hard they looked bloodless. Before the last squad car pulled away, Deputy Ward Tall, mustachioed, and no fan of HOA nonsense, turned to me with a warning. Keep an eye out, Eli, he said. Folks like her don't quit after one bad day. If she can't win straight, she might go sideways. I figured, I nodded. Already got the cameras up. Ward tipped his hat. Then you'll be just fine. Once they left, the land was quiet again almost. I walked the perimeter, inspecting the property. Someone had driven over my wildflower patch. One of my young sycamores had a hammock rope scar dug into its bark, and someone had left behind a tote bag full of half-melted s'mores supplies and HOA pamphlets. Figures. I tossed the bag in the fire pit, doused it in lighter fluid, and set it ablaze. That should have been the end of it, but I knew better. 2 days later, I got a visit from Miles Gregory. Miles was a retired land surveyor and one of the original Pine Hill residents before the HOA was even formed. He was also the kind of man who didn't say much unless he had something important to say, which made it all the more surprising when he showed up on my porch with a manila folder and a heavy scowl. You got a minute? He asked, eyes darting like a man who didn't want to be seen. Sure, I said, waving him inside. What's going on? Miles sat at my kitchen table, opened the folder, and laid out a series of maps, zoning plans, and handwritten notes. Found this in the county records office last week, he said, tapping a highlighted section on a zoning document. See this parcel line? They filed a request to redraw it. I leaned over the map. My land, clearly marked, clearly independent, was now overlapped by a faded red line labeled Pine Hill Acres Future Expansion. Proposed Phase 4. I blinked. What the hell is this? They're trying to annex you, Eli, Miles said, voice low. Legally. Quietly. They know the HOA can't touch you right now, so they're using county zoning to pull your land into their development plan. My stomach dropped. That's not even legal without notice or a public hearing, I said. Miles nodded. Which is why they're trying to sneak it through under the guise of a community cohesion initiative. I stared at the maps. Beatrix. She's involved, Miles said, but she's just the front. The paperwork was submitted by a consulting firm tied to Redwood Strategies. You know who owns that? I didn't. Her brother. And guess who signed off on the preliminary review? Don't tell me. Beatrix's husband. County Zoning Committee. This thing is rigged tighter than a rusty fence gate. I sat back, heart pounding. I'd known Karen, damn it. Beatrix was overstepping. But this wasn't some glorified block party gone wrong. This was a calculated land grab. And it wasn't just about HOA power. It was about money. Control. This isn't just about camping, I said quietly. Miles nodded. It never was. He stood, gathering the papers. I figured you should know. You've got about 10 days before the proposal moves to a quiet vote. After that, it'll be hell undoing it. I followed him to the door. Why are you helping me? I asked. He paused. Because I remember when this town was neighborly, before it turned into some Stepford suburb. You stood your ground, Eli. That means something. Then he left. I closed the door, my mind racing. Beatrix hadn't just brought tents onto my land. She was building a case one she hoped I'd be too isolated to fight. But she'd underestimated something important. I'd spent most of my life solving problems, fencing in wild horses, rewiring a barn in a lightning storm, digging irrigation trenches with nothing but a spade and a strong back. I wasn't about to be fenced in by a clipboard and a smile. Not now. Not ever. By dawn the next morning, I had brewed a pot of the strongest black coffee I could stomach and spread every document Miles gave me across the dining table. The evidence was there. Zoning applications, redrawn parcel lines, and developer correspondence tied directly to Beatrix's brother's firm, Redwood Strategies. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just trying to annex my land. They were trying to turn the entire north edge of Pine Hill into a luxury extension. Pine Hill Preserve, complete with paved walking trails, community centers, and boutique wine bars. And right in the middle of their glossy marketing renderings, my barn. They were building a fantasy on stolen land. I made 2 calls. The first was to Cassidy Blake, a no-nonsense real estate attorney who had once sued an entire HOA into dissolution on behalf of an elderly widow. I'd kept her card since the day she got Beatrix's friend Sheila booted from the HOA presidency after trying to outlaw tomato plants in front yards. She answered after 2 rings. Cassidy Blake. Hey, this is Eli Grant. You probably don't remember me. I remember you. You're the one with the dogs in the grain silo. Still have both. What's the emergency? I explained everything. Beatrix, the illegal campsite, the land annex plan, Redwood Strategies, and the county zoning committee's suspicious behavior. She didn't say much at first, but when I mentioned the quiet vote in 10 days, her tone changed. I want copies of everything, she said. We'll file an injunction first thing Monday. If they're skipping due process, we hit them with procedural violations. But that won't stop them forever. What will? Public exposure. Get people talking. You're not the only one they've tried this on, I promise you. That was my second call. To Joanna Keller, editor of the local Pine Hill Observer. She'd once written an expose on the HOA's yard flag restrictions that went viral in 3 states. She loved a good David versus Goliath. I texted her a single sentence. What if I told you the HOA was trying to illegally annex private land for a luxury expansion? She called me 2 minutes later. Tell me everything. We met that afternoon. She brought her camera, her notebook, and a level of fury I hadn't expected. They're doing this under the radar because they know the vote wouldn't pass if the public knew, she said, pacing along the property line. You give me documentation, photos, recorded statements, hell, even dog hair with DNA if it helps, and I'll blow this thing wide open. We shook hands on it. That night, I updated my security system, repositioned the motion-activated floodlights, and posted new no trespassing private property signs every 20 feet along the road. I wasn't taking chances. By Wednesday, Joanna's article was live. Headline: The land grab no one saw coming. HOA's secret plan to seize private property. It spread like wildfire through the Pine Hill community app, Facebook groups, and even got a mention on the local news. People were furious. I started getting messages from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. One read, "Eli, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what they were doing. We were told it was a community beautification effort. Count me in if you need support." Another said, "My cousin's a county assessor. Want me to dig into Beatrix's husband's approval history?" The tide was turning, but then they struck back. On Thursday morning, I woke to find a citation taped to my mailbox from the county, not the HOA. It claimed I was violating environmental codes by having uncontained livestock runoff near a protected watershed. It was a blatant lie. I didn't even own livestock anymore. My herd had been sold off 2 years ago. But the accusation was just believable enough to stick, and it was signed off by the same county official who had approved the Pine Hill Preserve zoning plan. I called Cassidy. "They're coming at you with everything they've got," she said. "This is textbook, paper harassment. We'll file for dismissal, but be prepared for more. Beatrix doesn't want your land, she needs it." "Why?" Cassidy paused. "Because the funding for Pine Hill Preserve depends on contiguous land acquisition. If she doesn't secure your property, the deal falls apart." Suddenly, everything made sense. The rush, the secrecy, the arrogance. Beatrix wasn't just on a power trip, she was protecting an investment. And if she lost, she wouldn't just lose face, she'd lose millions. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch, Titan's head resting on my boot as I watched the shadows stretch across my land. My land. The place my grandfather built with his bare hands. The place I bled into, planting fence posts and digging wells by hand. They weren't going to take it from me. Not with papers, not with politics, not with fake camping trips. They wanted a war. They had one. And I was just getting started. The next morning, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Cassidy had filed the injunction. Joanna's follow-up article, "Developer's Wife at Center of HOA Scandal," was now trending on the local news app, and the HOA's internal chat logs had somehow been leaked. Someone from the inside had flipped. The screenshots were damning. One showed Beatrix writing, "If Eli won't sell, we apply pressure until he folds. Nobody holds up Phase 3 for one stubborn farmer." Another message from an HOA treasurer read, "Can we move up the citation requests? Eli's property looks like a dump anyway. Let's bury him in violations." People were furious. The comment section exploded. Homeowners who had never questioned the HOA's motives before suddenly started examining their own random fines and penalties. By noon, a quiet rebellion was brewing. A petition demanding Beatrix's resignation had gathered over 400 signatures. But Beatrix wasn't done. That afternoon, the real attack came. Not through lawyers, not through politics, through sabotage. I was out back repairing a fence panel when Titan's deep bark echoed across the ridge. Shadow followed, growling low in her throat, pacing the tree line like something wasn't right. Seconds later, I saw it. Smoke, thin and white at first, but quickly darkening into a column that rose from the edge of my east field. I dropped my tools and sprinted toward it. When I reached the spot, my gut twisted. Someone had set fire to a pile of dry brush and garbage dumped near the edge of my property, next to my propane tanks. The fire hadn't reached the tanks yet, but it was dangerously close. I grabbed my emergency hose, pulled it across the gravel, and blasted the flames until they hissed into submission. Smoke clung to my clothes, and the heat made my skin sting, but I didn't stop until every ember was out. Then I found it. A half-burned HOA flyer stuffed inside a garbage bag. Coincidence? Not a chance. I called the fire marshal, who arrived within the hour. "Someone's playing games," he muttered after examining the scene. "This isn't an accident. This was staged. Probably thought it would spook you. Could have killed someone." I sent photos of the damage to Cassidy and Joanna. The fire marshal promised to include the flyer in his report. If Beatrix thought intimidation would make me cave, she was about to find out how wrong she was. That evening, I hosted a neighborhood gathering on my land open invitation. No HOA approval required. We called it Pine Hill Unfiltered. Dozens showed up. Some out of curiosity, some in quiet solidarity, others because they'd finally realized the HOA wasn't protecting the community, it was manipulating it. Cassidy spoke first, walking everyone through the legal overreach. Joanna followed, showing leaked documents and maps, proving the HOA's push for annexation and its secret partnership with Redwood Strategies. Then I spoke. I told them about the fire, the fake citations, the threats. I'm not against community, I said. I'm against corruption. You should be too. There was silence. Then applause. Even from people who hadn't spoken to me in years. Then came the unexpected. Miles stepped forward. He was one of Beatrix's oldest allies, a longtime HOA board member. But now, he looked shaken. I voted for this, he said quietly, voice hoarse. I didn't know what it was really about. I thought we were improving the neighborhood. But this is a land grab, a scam. I'm done. He pulled a folded sheet from his pocket, his resignation from the board. Gasps echoed across the gathering. Then, someone else stepped up. Then another. Within 15 minutes, 3 board members had resigned on the spot. Beatrix wasn't just losing control, she was losing her empire. But she wasn't going down quietly. That night, I received an anonymous email. You've made some dangerous enemies, Eli. Maybe it's time to start thinking about your safety. Accidents happen on old farms. Wouldn't want something to happen to your dogs. I stared at the screen, fists clenched. This wasn't a game anymore. This was war. But they forgot one thing. You can threaten a man's pride, his name, even his bank account. But you don't threaten his dogs. That was the line. And they had just crossed it. By the time the sun rose over Pine Hill the next morning, everything had changed. The local paper had run Joanna's full expose on the front page, above the fold. The headline hit like a gavel. HOA corruption, developer ties, and a community betrayed. The Pine Hill scandal. Below the headline were photos of Beatrix posing at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, side by side with Redwood Strategies executives. One photo was dated 6 weeks before she'd tried to stage the community camping retreat on my land. Underneath, bold bullet points listed the key allegations. Illegal attempts to annex private property, intimidation tactics and staged code violations, conflicts of interest with the county zoning board, evidence of arson under investigation. By mid-morning, Beatrix's house was swarmed, not by protesters, but by state investigators. 2 unmarked sedans, 1 marked sheriff's cruiser. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as she was escorted from her home, wrapped in a trench coat. Sunglasses, hiding eyes, no one cared to see. I stood at the edge of my property, arms crossed, Titan at my side. She didn't look at me as she passed, but I saw her jaw clench. Her kingdom had fallen. But this wasn't over yet, not until every wrong had been made right. The investigation into the HOA's dealings moved quickly, too quickly for Beatrix's liking. Turns out, when you overstep your bounds far enough, people who once looked the other way start turning around. Cassidy and I were invited to speak at a county zoning review hearing 2 days later. The room was packed standing room only. Most attendees weren't there to support me. They were there because they'd been affected too. A retired teacher from the South Side told of her backyard garden being torn down over a visual obstruction complaint. A war veteran shared how he'd been fined into foreclosure. A young mother tearfully recounted being bullied over the color of her mailbox. I listened, stunned. What had happened to our sense of community? Then it was my turn to speak. I stood before the panel and held up a thick binder of documents, maps, timestamps, footage, letters, the fire report, the anonymous threat. This isn't just about my land, I said. It's about abuse of power, under the guise of neighborhood improvement. It's about a small group deciding they know what's best for everyone and punishing anyone who says otherwise. The panelists, most of whom had never heard more than HOA buzzwords and development briefs, now looked visibly uncomfortable. Then, Joanna took the floor. She wasn't supposed to speak, but she did anyway. "You think this is just Pine Hill?" she said. "Think again. I've traced similar tactics to 3 other HOA developer partnerships across the state. This is bigger than one woman. This is systemic." That got their attention. 2 weeks later, the district attorney announced formal charges. Fraud. Conspiracy to defraud property owners. Reckless endangerment. Attempted arson. Evidence tampering. Beatrix wasn't alone in facing indictment. 2 HOA board members, a Redwood Strategies acquisitions manager, and even a zoning board advisor were named in the filings. The fallout was seismic. The HOA was dissolved by court order. The land parceling initiative tied to Redwood's Phase 3 project was terminated, and every single citation issued by the HOA over the past year was now under review. But for me, it wasn't about legal wins or headlines. It was about standing on my porch, watching the sunset, knowing the fight had been worth it. One night, as the stars began to blink into view over the ridge, Cassidy joined me on the porch. She handed me a folder. Inside was the final document from the county. My land had been officially rezoned as historically protected private agricultural property. Irrevocable, undeniable, mine. "Looks like you're officially off the map for good," she smiled. Titan woofed once, as if in agreement. We sat in silence a while, the kind only earned after surviving hell together. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. I shook my head. Not for a second. That weekend, I hosted another gathering. No permits, no board approval. Just good food, live music, laughter, and neighbors finally seeing each other as more than complaints or code violations. Even Joanna showed up, notepad tucked away. Just a neighbor now. I caught sight of Miles, the ex-board member, helping set up chairs. The retired teacher handed out lemonade. The veteran grilled burgers. The young mom brought cookies. As dusk fell, I stood before them. "No speeches," I said. "Just thank you for standing up, for waking up, for remembering that the community isn't something you control. It's something you protect." Applause wasn't loud, but it was real. Just as the fire pit crackled to life and music started, someone pointed to the horizon. A new family was moving into the old HOA office building, now repurposed as a community center one that belonged to everyone, not just those with clipboards. I smiled. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it barked once, then laid down on the porch with a full belly and a job well done.